This month marks 40 years since the brutal killing of Vincent Chin in a suburb of Detroit. The 27-year-old was beaten to death with a baseball bat by two men who were fined $3,000 and received no jail time. The killing sparked calls for justice in his name and a national movement among Asian Americans. Amna Nawaz is back with a closer look at the legacy of Vincent Chin today, part of our ongoing coverage of Race Matters.
Judy, on June 19th in 1982, Vincent Chin, just days away from his wedding, went out to celebrate with friends in Detroit. Later that night, two white men, Ronald Evans and his stepson Michael Nitz, attacked Chin and beat him to death. A 1998 documentary, Who Killed Vincent Chin, dove into his story and was later nominated for an Academy Award. It's getting a special airing on POV tonight.
It was a hot night in Detroit, and the men from the auto plants were out for a night on the town. Somebody started a fight. When it was over, Vincent Chin was dead, his head split open with a baseball bat.
Vincent Chin would be alive today if he were not Asian.
Was it a case of racism or a barroom brawl?
God, it's so hard to explain. It's not something you plan on happening, but it happens.
I want justice for Vincent. I want justice for my son. Thank you.
To mark 40 years since Vincent Chin's death, that documentary will air tonight on PBS stations across the country. For more on what followed Chin's death and Asian American identity today, I'm joined by author Min Jin Lee. Her novels include Pachinko and Free Food for Millionaires. She's a writer in residence at Amherst College. Min, welcome back to the NewsHour. Thanks for making the time.
Hello, Amna.
So there are a number of remembrance and rededication services in Vincent Chin's name and memory around the country. But to mark those 40 years, people are remembering what happened that night. And there's still a story that very much resonates with millions of people today. Why do you think that is, 40 years later?
Oh, I think because right now it's probably one of the worst times to be Asian or Asian American in the United States. And that's primarily can be demonstrated through the data that we have seen that since the onset of the pandemic, over 11,000 incidents of hate have occurred and have been reported. It's in the past a little over a year and a half. And that is what is going on. And that is the experience of Asians and Asian Americans today.
And we have to note, today, Asian Americans are the fastest growing racial or ethnic demographic group in America, also the most diverse, right, in terms of ethnicity and language and faith. But before the death of Vincent Chin, there wasn't a real Asian American identity. I mean, I think it's fair to say his death and the calls for justice that followed helped to really form and shape a community. What should we understand about that?
I think what's really interesting is exactly what you just said. Asian American as a political identity was really formed around his era. And I think that after his terribly tragic murder, what ended up happening was people felt like we need to become more politically important and powerful. And that has occurred. And I think that that's a beautiful legacy of a very tragic event.
It's also really fascinating to me when you look at the historical footage. You see people like Helen Zia, who we saw there in the clip, who was an Asian American civil rights icon. You also see people like Jesse Jackson. There were a number of Black civil rights leaders who showed up with Vincent Chin's mother and called for justice in his name. What do we need to understand about how the Asian American movement for justice was built on the Black-led fight for civil rights?
Oh, the extraordinary debt that Asian Americans, as well as white women, all oppressed minorities in this country have for African American civil rights movement cannot be understated. And I think that when African American civil rights leaders took up their time and energy and their resources and their political connections to come and support to get justice for Vincent Chin, then that's the reason why it became more remembered. And I think Helen Zia, who is one of the executors of his estate and his memory, has really highlighted this point. And it's so important for us to recognize that, especially this weekend.
You talked earlier about how you think it's a terrible time to be Asian American right now. You wrote a piece for the New York Times earlier this year that was called Asian Americans Have Always Lived with Fear. So I wonder if you, as you reflect back on that, is the fear today the same as it was 40 years ago at the time of Vincent Chin's death, or even earlier? Or is it different and new?
You know, I think ironically, Asians and Asian Americans have faced great hostility since their arrival in this country. That said, there have been moments of great peace as well. The past year and a half and the past, I guess, since the pandemic, almost over 2 years, we saw a greater rise of incidents of violence against Asians and Asian Americans, primarily because since the Trump administration and people who supported his organization have often said that the virus for the pandemic came from China, and then that virus became associated with Asians and Asian Americans. And unfortunately, Asian Americans are often seen as a monolith in which we don't even have a distinct ethnicity or identity. And we are often considered disease carriers and stereotyped as foreigners.
We're talking now 40 years marked from the death of Vincent Chin, and I wonder, as you look back on everything that's happened in our community and more broadly among marginalized communities here, if there's something good or a lesson that can come out of such a tragic event, what do you think that is today, especially for the next generation?
I think that the greater politicization of Asian Americans and civic engagement to support democracy in this country is a beautiful thing. And I think that unfortunately, you don't want bad things to happen for you to really pay attention to voting. But if we can all be more engaged as good citizens in this country, it's wonderful news out of a tragedy.
Finally, Min, I know the work that you do in your writing, you say you try to humanize people. You try to make sure that you are building bridges in your work. Tell me a little bit about the importance of that narrative work that you do.
I think that within story, it's possible for the reader as well as a writer to feel a greater sense of identification with each other and to find empathy. And when we find empathy, we realize that Asians and Asian Americans are not this great horde or a mob, but rather individuals and human beings. And we can feel empathy and sympathy for human beings. And that's a very important role of storytelling. And I hope to be part of that.
That is Min Jin Lee joining us tonight. Thank you so much for your time. Always good to have you.
Thank you, Amna.